let's cut right to the chase. If you clicked on this video, you're probably wondering, what in the world is this guy have to say about politics? Why does he say that he hates it? Is this guy a leftist? Is this guy on the right? We'll solve that problem when we come to it. I wanted to talk about a very, very sober yet personal reflection on my end. This is my story with politics and how I've come, as I've converted to Christianity, to loathe it. I live in the United States. The United States is a country that is deeply politically divided. There is a dominant progressive presence in the United States, and there is a junior conservative. There is a kind of junior conservative group. Both of these sides, for the last 30 years, have been in a tense, pretty much stalemate. That was until 2016. Politics became less about the war effort and Bushian politics or leftist critiques. It became about identity. It became about culture. Because in 2008 we put a black guy with velvet gloves in office, and we gave him 2 terms in office, and we drove a bunch of scared people up the wall. And then 2016 happened, and he met his dialectical opposite, an orange guy with a business tycoon suit and all of that kind of stuff, right? So you're probably wondering, if you're still sitting here, what in the world do I have to say about it? Well, I wanted to talk about the subject. I wanted to talk about political philosophy, my story with political philosophy, why I find political philosophy to be, especially now in the United States, to be deeply drenched in Hegelianism and deeply drenched in things about identity and culture, and how I've always felt like a constant outsider in that fight. So, for those of you that don't know, my name is Caleb WH. This is my little corner of the internet where we talk about theology, philosophy, video games, anime, storytelling, and the like, trying to give you a light in the dark in this vain, cruel world. And I'm very glad to make your acquaintance. For those of you that don't know, I am an Orthodox Christian. I was a convert to the religion in 2023, and I was chrismated here in 2025. And so a lot of my opinions are deeply shaped by my religious worldview, and I wanted to share that with you. So, as I film this, it is currently 7:10 in the morning, and I will be going to college to write a paper and do a test today. But before I did that, I wanted to talk to you about politics, and I wanted to hopefully give my 2 cents on the subject. This is going to be mainly relegated to American politics, and I hope that this yap-filled rant on politics and how much I've come to despise it will help you personally. That's why I do this. So thank you guys for watching. Feel free to, the YouTube colloquial term, like and subscribe. And let's get into it. I got into politics quite young, probably around the age of 8, during the 2016 election. At first, I liked the drama of it. I just liked the starry people on the debate stage roasting each other. That's why I got into it. And the second reason I got into politics was this constant feeling of wanting to be equal to everyone around me. I hated feeling inferior or less than people. Mainly related to my story, bullying, skepticism on religion. Sort it out yourself, right? I got into the 2016 presidential debates. I thought they were very interesting, and this kind of had me in hook, line, and sinker. At first, as most people do, I just followed what my parents told me. At around the age of 10 or 11, however, I started questioning things quite interestingly. I started questioning politics. I wanted to know about politics. I started questioning religion, etc., all that kind of stuff, right? And way too young, I started watching college lectures and reading as much as I could get my hands on religion. I had YouTube, and I had unfiltered access to the internet. For better or for worse, did lead me to God. And So, I wanted to talk to you. College lectures may be the wrong word. Probably YouTube videos. Yeah, that's about right. But at the time, as you guys know, the America was in a bit of a crap storm. The election was so divisive, if I remember correctly, that there were pretty much protests every single day in most of our major cities that were getting just the media was just loving to lap that up. And by the way, when I say the media, I don't say that like the right. I don't say that like I don't say that like the right. I say that because I know that most of the media companies are owned by very, very rich billionaires. The Fox News Corporation and the people who own Fox are Israel supporters and former IDF soldiers, and the people who own the left are bigwig philanthropists in the United Kingdom and the broader European sphere. And they don't tell you that because, of course, they don't. 3 major companies own pretty much all of the media companies in the United States, and all 3 of them hate each other. Yeah, because they're competitive, and we should totally not bring back the guillotine. I'm kidding. We'll talk about that in a second. But when I started studying politics, I got super into social conservatism. That kind of picked me up pretty hard. I got into politics at 11 years old by people like Ben Shapiro, Steven Crowder, and the like. Most of you guys know who they are. I ended profoundly different than most people, but that was where I got my start. Then I started getting into the Daily Wire. Most of you guys know who they are. If you don't, you probably know names like Ben Shapiro, Michael Knowles, and Matt Walsh. They're a pretty big media company, and they've gotten super popular over the last couple of years with the conservative sphere. My story with politics doesn't really get more interesting until I was around 16. 15, 16, I joined the debate club, and the debate club shattered all of my preconceived notions on politics, and it showed me what politics actually was. It killed the kind of American-centric nature of my political beliefs, and it profoundly shaped me in a more philosophical direction. This is around the time I was trying to learn about religion, where what I wanted to believe, etc., etc., and God finding me in that place. And when I was 16, I ended up reading. I started reading a lot. 16 and 17. And the political thinkers that I remember being the most scary were the political thinkers that everyone on the right demonized. Karl Marx, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who I am very blessed and perhaps cursed to own a copy of The Social Contract. Let me put that back on my shelf. And what is really lacking from our political discourse, I think, like really lacking, is we are worried about stories. We are trying to tell ourselves manufactured stories in order to take over the other side. We are in a constant war of identity right now. This is a war of atomization and identity, and it has been that way for 20 years. And all of the Gen X people and boomers are in hook, line, and sinker. My father is probably the most profoundly interesting person that I've met from that generation, who is profoundly smart. He is a kind of skeptic, a political skeptic. He's very, very, and so he leans more conservative just based on his skepticism. I do not hold to the skeptical epistemological position, but I do understand why it exists. Somebody has to ask those questions, and somebody has to answer them. Unfortunately, someone has to answer them. But I remember this. I was taught very young to demonize figures like Karl Marx. Karl Marx was a communist. He's evil. I was taught to demonize people like Rousseau. And then when I got older, 16 and 17, I started watching PhD philosophy lectures, and I started watching a guy named James Lindsay. Now, if you guys disagree with him, that's fine. I get why you disagree with him. He kind of went off the deep end recently. But he gave a profound lecture on Marxism that was really good, like just objectively, regardless of what you think about him and his politics. It was a really, really good explanation of the Marxist dialectic and how it traces its roots back to Hegel, and Rousseau was one of the first progressive thinkers to kind of lay the groundwork for that. And so, what is interesting about the way that people think about politics is a lot of them will not do the reading on why their politicians keep saying the same things, why their politicians seem to change up, and they just listen to people. They just listen to people with jobs and with money and with power and with success, and that's a problem. You shouldn't listen to people just because of the amount of money that they make. You also shouldn't listen to people based on just their social status. I can tell you from personal experience. The problem is, we're stuck in an age where that is what we want to do. We want to feel like we're attached to a movement. We want to feel like we have identity, because we don't. You know why we don't? Because of the Enlightenment and the existentialist movements coming out of the Enlightenment. Now, I am a Christian. I do find some existentialist thinkers to be profoundly beautiful. But I also recognize that modern politics was basically damned by one French thinker. No, it's not Rousseau, as much as I like to, in my publication on my Substack and on my other things, I like to roast him pretty hard. But I also have a deep affection for Rousseau, because I read Confessions after I was done reading everything else, and it made me cry, because I realized why he ended up in the way that he did, and it sounded profoundly almost like me. And that's kind of what's always scared me about it. But off of that, one French thinker is the reason that we have politics the way that it is, and that is a thinker by the name of George Friedrich Wilhelm Hegel, George Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel. And he is a philosopher that a lot of people don't study, and if they do, most of them are like, bro, what is he on? But here's the thing, is the what is he on comes from someplace, because Hegel was a genius. He was a French thinker who had a profound impact on European and thus American politics. He wrote books such as The Philosophy of Right, The Philosophy of Logic, The Phenomenology of Spirit. And these three books, along with some of his other works, profoundly shaped politics in the 20th century. Hegel basically coined the term Geist, or Zeitgeist. And the reason that he is so influential in politics is because he was one of the first thinkers to say, instead of there being an objective truth, political history and truth is defined by historical circumstance. And he uses this kind of analogy that he calls immanent critique or some of you may know the Hegelian dialectic, to discuss these subjects. Hegel, however, had students, and we're not going to talk about Hegelian dialectic. I can do that later. I'm not going to sit here and yap about that, because that's not what this is about. Just know that he is an extremely important figure, and you can go read his stuff online. But then Hegel, however, was very influential, and he had students. He was a known Bonapartist. He was a thinker who was very much in favor of the Bonapartean crown. And it was Bonaparte that ended up inspiring most of the works that he made. However, if you guys know anything about Hegel, he had students, and he had quite a lot. One of these students was Friedrich Engels. And Friedrich Engels went on to write the Communist Manifesto with Karl Marx. And Engels was a known materialist and atheist. He was a profoundly atheistic thinker to a point of fervor. And the Communist Manifesto was the kind of magnum opus of his economic and political career, along with Karl Marx. Karl Marx, it was kind of his debut. Not really his debut, but similar. But it is these thinkers that profoundly affected politics now. And the right, however, is more influenced by people influenced by Hegel, but is also influenced by people like Niccolo Machiavelli, who's slightly before, Thomas Hobbes, who's also slightly before, people like Arthur Schopenhauer, Friedrich Nietzsche. Like, these people created the modern right. And you can trace their kind of lineage back. You can trace the modern right's thinking back to them. In America, however, it's a little bit different. People like Edmund Burke. Edmund Burke was a profoundly interesting thinker, and one that I think deserves a lot more credence than just ambivalent conservative, because he was, like, for the time period, he was profoundly progressive. And even if you're not, I don't even like staging it that way, because he was a profoundly interesting thinker on his own. He wrote an aesthetic treatise called The Philosophical Inquiry into the Origin of the Ideas of the Sublime and Beautiful, which is one of the best aesthetic treatises I have ever read. He wrote works such as what else? I'm trying to think here. He was profoundly interested in the safeguarding of Irish Catholics. He talked about the abuses and mistreatments in the East India colonies, which is basically modern day India. And if you know anything about Indian politics, you know it's profoundly impacted by British colonization. He was one of the first thinkers to kind of go against that. And people give him this kind of this argument that he's a conservative profoundly for one philosophical treatise, Reflections on the Revolution in France, where he wrote watching the terror from across the channel, and reading about the terror, and it profoundly impacted his view on politics, and honestly, rightfully so. He watched the terror devolve from a want of actual reform to a game of revenge and retribution. And French politics at the time had gone mad because of the National Assembly dissolving a bunch of times, the radical, very, very radical political thinkers coming out of that era, people like Danton, Jean-Paul Marat, etc., who were profoundly progressive. He even wrote a very funny 40-page lecture. He wrote a very funny 40-page letter to the National Assembly, which is stupidly funny. If you haven't read it, it very much reeks of Edmund Burke in a good way. And he calls Rousseau a miscreant with a lack of taste, which is very much him, which is very much a him line. But these thinkers were what I was reading at the age of 16, 17, and 18. I was, and now I have a small physical library, and I have a very large audiobook library where I read those things. I find philosophy to be interesting in regards to my religious vocation. I write a lot, and I plan on teaching philosophy, but this is, again, kind of a pipe dream at this point. I don't know. My life can kind of flip upside down a bunch, and it's done that for a while, and it's going to continue to do that, I think. But politics is profoundly infected by these thinkers, and I mean to the nth degree. The modern left you can trace to Jean-Jacques Rousseau, Friedrich Hegel, and Marx. And the thinkers that profoundly impact the right are people like Friedrich Nietzsche, Niccolo Machiavelli, Thomas Hobbes, etc. These thinkers profoundly impact how we think, and we don't even know their names because we absorb it through our parents and our grandparents, and they teach us this. And when they teach us this and they teach us how to think, combined with the school system that teaches us how to think, not teaches us what to think. I had a school that was profoundly, compared to most of the schools in the area, was profoundly more interested in teaching people how to think compared to most schools. But it really didn't. People don't know these people. I sound like a yapping conspiracy theorist when I talk about these people, but these people have so much of an effect on politics that understanding their ideas may help crack most of the political problems that we have here in the United States and abroad. Politics is inherently defined to the modern person by historical circumstance. There is no grounding for absolute truth to most modern people unless they are religious or unless they are a profound believer in the objective truth, which also does exist outside of religion, but it would be mainly related to material empiricists who also would be incredibly swooned by these ideas. And the Enlightenment, which ended up breaking the divide between the people's consciousness and God, and basically split people into two camps: secular people and religious people. And it really hasn't gotten better since. But people like Friedrich Hegel and Karl Marx have, with their ideas of epistemological dialectic, immanent critique, things like that, profoundly impact how we think about politics. You ever wondered why, if you ever talk to a Marxist, that they are profoundly interested in talking about the problems within a system? It is precisely because their philosophy demands it. Their philosophy demands conflict. Their philosophy demands revolution, revolt. It runs off of that anger. It runs off of that feeling of being an outsider or being marginalized. It runs on it. And I mean that quite literally. The Marxism as a epistemology is the closest thing to a religion you can get without being a religion. It has a creation story, which is like just basically modern science. Not necessarily modern science, but like they're two different ideas. But you get what I'm saying. They have a telos of man, the proletariat and the proletariat and the bourgeois, and they have an eschaton. They have the international workers' paradise, or the completeness of Marxism. When the revolution has gone international, etc., etc. And the entirety of Marxism is based in this philosophy, in constant critique, constant progress, constant problems having to be made. Because if there are problems, there is going to be somebody that reacts to it as a kind of antithesis, which in their case is the bourgeoisie. And that conflict ends up propelling history into this kind of spiral until they get to the culmination of it, which is what they call the international workers' paradise. And it is quite literally a revolution of revolt. And if you've ever wondered what political thinkers have had such a profound impact on the way the left thinks now, please read Karl Marx. He is a atheistic materialist who wrote most of his stuff among the poor of London and France, and he wrote the philosophical manuscript of 1844, Das Kapital, and what he's most famous for, the Communist Manifesto. And if you think that the left is somehow devoid of this thinker, that is totally wrong. Marxism is not what your conservative uncle says. It's not oat milk. It is an entire philosophical framework on how to view the world. And people, whether they like it or not, are profoundly impacted by their philosophy. However, as much as I would like to sit here and explain that, what I would like to continue discussing is the story around why I find these thinkers so interesting. Is when I was 16, I was dealing with a lot of these feelings of being an outsider or marginalized, and I was always taught to kind of demonize Karl Marx, and then I read him, and it scared me to death. I read him outside. It is the funniest thing. I read him outside of a cheesecake factory. Yes, that is the most capitalist thing I've ever said. I read him outside of a cheesecake factory on a choir trip, and I was listening to the Communist Manifesto while talking to some of my friends, and the whole time I was sitting there like, oh my gosh, this guy is like night and day levels of. So he basically, in the Communist Manifesto, it stages humanity's struggle, the humanity's corpus of history, as a struggle between the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. And it says the entirety of the corpus of human history has been a struggle for power, and this is the entirety of human endeavors. Like, not all of it, like this is the entirety of what all human endeavors are for, is for economic and material wealth or capital. In the second movement is not the second movement. The second chapter of the Communist Manifesto, he lays out the necessity for revolution. And one of the most profound lines that scared me to death was, if I remember correctly, "We do not believe in truth, for truth is a creation of the bourgeoisie." I remember I closed the book after reading that, and I said, yeah, that's about right. I closed the book and I said, I know exactly where this is going now. Like, I knew almost immediately he was going to say that, truth is only power, that kind of the dialectic must ensue in order to create an international workers' paradise. And he kind of stops there. He doesn't go into more detail on what it would look like, what's the systems, what all that kind of stuff. He just kind of says this would be the culmination of all of Marxism, or the communism, basically. And if you guys know anything about the 20th century, you know that communism got super popular, and the experiment was run multiple times, all of them ending in either economic collapse, the revolt due to tyranny being put in place, or and mass human rights abuses on pretty much all fronts. And the Marxists don't like when people say this, because naturally their philosophy is dialectical. They cannot admit to the antitheses. They can't admit to the antitheses like premise. What was interesting when I read these thinkers at 16 years old outside of a cheesecake factory was it scared me. It deeply scared me, because I know how that gets into a human being. I know how that enters into someone's soul. Because I should have been the first target of Marxism. I was a profoundly autistic guy living inside of a dogmatic conservative house with dogmatic religious parents, deeply skeptical of religion. I was the prime target for it, and it didn't get me. I found the ideas to be lacking in epistemological substance, and I believed profoundly, and I still do believe profoundly, in the objective nature of truth. And that was why it couldn't get me, is because it tried to sell me on the idea that human beings were entirely dialectical, and I thought that was just wrong. It just thought that was no, that's not correct. Like, if you look at religion, if you look at science, if you look at human endeavors of those natures, they're not based in capital. So not all human endeavors are based entirely in capital. They just can't be. And Marx calls religion the opium of the masses. It's just to serve the it's just to serve the bourgeoisie. And I was like, have you read any religious history? Do you not know how punk religion kind of gets? I mean, even if it's not Christianity, even Islam, there are people that died for the premise that Allah was profoundly in love with humanity. There's people like Al-Hallaj, who was martyred for his ecstatic utterances and was called a heretic, and he was killed for that. Or the Franciscans, or the martyrs of the Eastern Orthodox faith, etc., etc. To say that it's all based in this economic capital is wrong, and to say that truth doesn't exist when it's right in front of us is kind of also insane as well. But nevertheless, these thinkers became very, very popular, and reading them at a very, very young age scared me deeply, because I realized that I should have been the target. I also, by the way, what also deeply shaped my view of Marxism, deeply shaped my distaste with Marxism, was its inevitability of tyranny. Regardless of what you think about the Soviet Union, one can admit that after Stalin, Lenin's revolution was kind of dead in the water. Stalin was a brutal, and I mean brutal, political thinker and political figure. I have dead martyrs and dead saints in my religion that were just killed, by the way, for just practicing the religion. Just killed for being Christian. killed for believing in the axiological equality of all human beings, believing that Jesus died and rose from the dead because it was somehow anti-state or anti-revolutionary, which it kind of is, but not really. It's not. When they say anti-revolutionary, they're saying anti-Marxist epistemology. That's what they're saying. And yeah, Christianity is deeply anti-Marxist epistemology, but ironically, it has a lot of the same ethical concerns of Marxism, like the hatred of exploitation, the equality of all human beings, whether king or peasant, the profound dignity and love and human worth, being pro dignity and worth to an extreme degree, like that kind of stuff. Nevertheless, Marxism got extremely popular in places like the Soviet Union, in places like China, in places like Vietnam, in places like Grenada, in places like Cuba, etc., etc. Marxism is pretty much all over the planet now and is a very, very influential way of thinking. And whether you like it or not, it is extremely influential in the United States. And it's mainly only relegated to things like schools and people, because we have freedom of speech, freedom of the press, and that allows for Marxist dialectic to kind of get a hotbed there. I mean, this is why Kissinger basically, this is why people like Kissinger and the HUAC convention were so popular, is because at the very least they had like a few people, and if they can get a few people, they can get anybody. But as much as I disagree with the ethics of that, at like completely, it would be wrong to say that it isn't influential. But the thinkers that have scared me since would be thinkers like who am I thinking of? The thinkers that have scared me since, and perhaps scared me more, were the radical Republicans and progressives of the French Revolution and the broader leftist kind of apparatus. People like Jean-Jacques Rousseau, people like Voltaire, people like Mary Wollstonecraft. As much as I love most of her stuff, I do recognize that she was also extremely progressive. And ultimately, throughout all of this, as I'm reading all of this kind of stuff, right, I found politics to be extremely, and I mean extremely, found politics to be just trying to name wounds that it couldn't name. And this was Hegel's point. Hegel believed truly that history was defined by historical circumstances, because he watched the rise of Napoleon Bonaparte, and he watched a very, very Machiavellian man take power and exert his will on the broader European sphere, and he loved it, and he wanted to name what that was. And so Hegel creates his phenomenology of spirit and his philosophy of right, where he explains that the state is the actualization of human endeavors, and that there is a constant, imminent critique that happens in society. If you look up the chained dog analogy, it is the Hegelian version of the chained dog analogy, etc. But Hegel was a philosopher that I very much disagreed with. I believed in objective truth. I believed in the existence of God. I believed that society, while influenced by these terms, it was not the only thing that it was influenced by. It's influenced by individual ideas. It's influenced by stories. It's influenced by personal circumstances. It's influenced by, and it's also influenced profoundly by the actions and reactions of other people. You can call that historical circumstance, but it's not only historical circumstance, because there are a set of parameters that it has. It's not just free for all. There is a set of parameters that influence politics. There is a set of parameters that influences reality. Okay? And if there is truth, then politics trying to weave stories that are all contradictory is not going to get anywhere. It's just not. You can think that all you want. You can say that it's just historical circumstance and subjective truth. That's just not true. Like, because a subjectivist and a moral relativist would have a hard time explaining their subjective relativists when you start talking about objects. And that's just about everything. Like, for instance, this a moral relativist and a person that believes in subjective truth could not really, if they were in this room with me, could not look at this astronaut and say, he's not real. He's just a figment of your imagination. I'm a solipsist. I believe that it only exists in my mind. You just couldn't do that. You could argue that from maybe a rationalist perspective, that the only thing or an empiricist perspective, the only thing that exists is the human mind. But even that is just kind of like doesn't have a lot of epistemological backing. Objects exist. Things exist independent of our sense experience. They just do. Our sense experience merely picks up on these things. They are not the arbiters of its existence. I'm not a rationalist, or at the very least, I'm not a I'm not an empiricist. But I do find that position to be the plague that politics is in. The unbelief in objective truth, the disbelief in God, and thus a grounding to ground reality in, and thus every politics has become a every man for himself game of stories. You build a story. If you're the right, you build a story of the Marxists trying to take over the world, and all the globalist elitist hegemony trying to take over. Believe me, I would know because I was in that camp. You weave a story about one man trying to fix everything and go back to the way things were in a lot more simpler time, and watch it, go back to the way things were, follow your ancestors, that kind of stuff. You weave a story of myth. And the progressives do the exact same thing. They weave a story of revolt, of revolution, of oppression, of dreaming, of human dignity, that kind of thing. They weave that story, and it plays itself out in human history. But both of these positions have truth to them. Both of them have truth to them, and both of them are lying about a bunch of things because they have to, or they think they have to. Because if you don't believe in God, anything goes. And I mean that quite literally. When I converted to Christianity and started reading the radical Republicans, I started reading the fascists, I started reading them. I started getting profoundly interested in why politics had become such a wound in my society. And I figured it out. I literally, or at least I think I figured it out. I could be completely wrong, but I really think it's because of a lack of belief in the objective truth, and it's a lack of belief in reality, and it is a inherent subjectivist view of reality, and this fracturing and atomization of human beings due to this fact. And it is that has profoundly impacted politics. It is the reason your conservative uncle won't strut up about DEI. It's the reason that if you have a Marxist friend, won't shut up about the billionaires and the 1%. It's the reason that it's because that they do not actually believe in objective truth. They believe in a story. They believe in revolts. They believe in tradition. They believe in all of these things. These are the stories that they attach themselves to. And Christianity is the only story that I have ever seen that is true and holds up to even like the most extreme levels of skepticism. I mean, you can come up with a psychological reason for one near-death experience. You can't come up with a reason for hundreds every year. You also can't come up with explanations for thousands of stories of things that are, in a Kantian sense, would be below phenomenon or unknowable, non-empirically verifiable phenomena that seem to just happen everywhere. Christianity has a word for that. You don't have an explanation for hundreds of cases of people floating off of a chair. You just don't. You just don't have an explanation for that. That's fine. You don't have to have an explanation for that. I have an explanation for that, and that's either pre-less demonic possession or something, or one of the two, right? I can explain it, and I can give extremely verifiable instances of these things happening in reality. There is something about Christianity as a religion that is almost undeniable in the way that it breaks what should be considered natural law, like routinely. And the atheists can come about, it's psychological, it's sociological, but if you really press them on that, they don't have an explanation. They don't have an explanation for consciousness, or why we humans have memory apparatuses, or why we have emotional regulation. We have chemical reasons for our emotional, but we don't have what starts the chain. Christianity has an explanation for that, and it has verifiable instances of people having this happen to them. Just how it is. And you can kind of filter your way, you can try to filter your way or try to atheistic way around. At that point, you guys are more religious than us. At that point, you guys talk about the Big Bang. It's like, okay, please tell me what started the sequence of events that started the Big Bang, which started the 13.8 billion years that we know to be the history of the universe, and they cannot tell you the answer to that because their epistemology is empiricist. And politics is suffering from the exact same problem. It is suffering from dialectical epistemology. It is suffering from empiricism. And this suffering will only continue if we continue to allow these ideas to not be critiqued. And if this comes into contact with people in power, so be it. I've been a pretty gung-ho person from the very beginning. If I can handle a school board or two, I can handle maybe a state government. That's probably not true. I'll probably get arrested. But when I signed up for this religion, I signed up for the dying part. I signed up for telling the truth regardless of people here. And if you guys don't like what I'm saying, that's fine. You guys don't have to like what I'm saying. If you guys think this is just a conspiracy theorist on the internet ranting, read the stuff. Just go ahead and read it. Because I'm not done with this story. We have a little bit left. We have a small bit left. I hate politics. I hate it precisely because of this issue. I hate it precisely because of this wound that it has inflicted on thousands of people throughout society. I have seen so many people that have been damaged by a lack of identity, a lack of belief in God, and the consequences of this dialectical epistemology. It is no small feat to say that modern quote-unquote liberalism, as much as I detest that term, has led to several for better or for worse, has allowed for more media freedom. More media freedom equals more things. More things equal more bad things. More bad thing equals more hurt. For instance, I have struggled with pornography for the last 8 years. I know people whose lives have been destroyed by such things, and that the precise reason for that was because of the 1960s and 70s, because of the free love and sexual revolution. We call it the sexual revolution. It's not really a correct term. It is a hodgepodge of things like feminism, Marxism, and other political ideologies that got pretty popular back then. And it is things like the degradation of media becoming more and more explicit. Young people getting exposed to diabolical things at young ages. The increase in things like, as much as you may disagree with this assumption, gang culture. In low-income areas in the United States is a huge problem. People in working-class families are having trouble getting food on the table because of the cost of living crisis, because some guy in a chair wants power, wants money, wants more hookers, wants more fun, right? And the only reason they have this idea that they have to live life into leave the dying to the dead and screw everybody else is because, hey, there's no truth, there's no God, have fun. You can thank Albert Camus for that idea, right? And it's a problem. It's a huge problem because I have seen people suffering because of this. I have met people personally who are suffering. It is the reason this publication exists, is to rage against these things. It is to stage this revolt that is the cross, that is Christ, that is this trampling of our biggest problems as human beings, such as ontological decay or sin, death, and murder and hatred and all of these kinds of things. Christianity has an antidote for it, and as an antidote that routinely breaks the natural inclinations of human beings to a point of almost absurdity. And if you disagree with that premise, that's fine. You cannot deny, however, the argumentation is at least sound. If you wish to attack the argument, please attack the internal axioms, being the existence of God, being the existence of objective truth, and being the existence of an interlocking morality and order to the cosmos. Politics is suffering from this disease. It has been suffering from this disease for over... It is the reason that we have these problems. So what do we do about it now? Well, there's really only one thing we can do about it, and that is to hopefully cling to the truth, cling to love, cling to virtue, cling to these things like our lives depend on it. Drop everything that you have and spend the rest of your life in constant service to this good. Now, we can talk about the ecclesiology or the epistemology of that later. I do not wish to have such an argument. This video has already gone on for 45 minutes, and it has discussed very, very interesting subjects. Human beings want a story. They want, there's the reason that the LGBTQ movement is so large. People, for some reason, develop sexual vices. These sexual vices are deeply shameful and socially taboo. And these sexual vices are so that they have a deep, profound imprint on the human person. And this profound imprint sometimes becomes immutable to the point where you are going to be struggling with it for the rest of your life. You are not less of a human for that. I love you. I don't hate you because I disagree with the ethics of a certain premise. And I can thank the evangelicals for making you believe that I think that, which I don't. I would never believe such a premise. I love you so much. Like, I care, I will your good to the point of almost absurdity. It's the reason that I get up in the morning, is to write how much I care about you and how much there is a synthesis for people that are weird. There is a synthesis for people that are outsiders. There is truth for those people. There is love. There is dignity for those people. And that's not a conservative uncle take, because believe me, I have my problems with conservatives too. Lastly, I think it would be of great nature to say one of the most profound influences on me politically has been where I grew up. Said it before, I grew up a social conservative, got exposed to very, very progressive ideas, and got exposed to Christianity, and now my entire political belief system is based on Christ. Christ, to me, is politics. He is how we should relate to other people. Now, there is a natural question that arises from this. Okay, wise guy, please tell me how we should structure government. It's almost besides the point. It really is. It really almost is besides the point. I can see how a republic-style government could be Christian. I can see how a monarchy could be Christian. I can see how an anarchist federation could end up being Christian, because politics becomes almost irrelevant when you have a substrata for your actions. Statecraft is a job that someone has to do, but it's not related to your identity. You are not your sin, and you're also not your virtue. You're human. You're created in the image of God. You are a holy thing. You are an icon. You just are. And I have become so begrieved by this because it has infected nearly every single person in my life. This kind of idea of me, kind of utilitarianism, or this kind of idea of dialectical epistemology has become a disease. And I mean that. Like, it has become such a political disease. it's the reason, like, it is quite literally the source of a lot of people. It's not the source of all your problems, obviously, but the fundamental misunderstanding of human nature, the fundamental misunderstanding of what truth is, the fundamental misunderstanding of what love is and kindness and virtue is the thing that is staining our politics. And I will be sitting here screaming into the abyss of the internet until someone listens to that premise. Until a bunch of people listen to that premise, or no one listens, or one person, 1,000 people, let it be blessed. Christ is how we should relate to other people. It's the reason I made this video. It's the reason I sat down in front of this camera at now 7:57 in the morning and discussed why I think politics is disgusting. And the last thing that I will say is, if you are a leftist, if you are on the right, if you are a fascist, if you are a Marxist, if you're an anarchist, I love you. I love you so much that I get up at 8 a.m. in the morning and I write these articles. And I write these articles, I discuss this to a camera. I get up and I yap in front of a computer, right? I just do this because I care. It is the only... And because Christ gave me a second chance. And if he can find a social conservative who almost became a Jacobin-style progressive, then he can find you. He can find a Marxist, he can find an anarchist, he can find whatever abyss that you are in. If you get rid of that shame that the devils have you in when it comes to sin, and you call out from the abyss of yourself, you'll find him. And sometimes he's not gonna come like down in like a fiery vision. It may be a sense impression. It may be a sense impression that you don't know why it's there. It may be a whisper in the wind. It may be audible words. It may be nothing. It may be just a circumstance that happens in your life that may lead you towards that premise. But I can assure you, there is a place for weirdos like us in this world. And this is the reason that I write this thing. This is the reason that I live. And it's the reason that I will continue to live. I'll get whatever job they want. I'll do whatever I need to do. Christ gave me a second chance at existence. And it would be wrong for me not to say these things to you. Because I know that we are suffering in this country. We have higher amounts of suicide, high amounts of depression and anxiety. We have atomization. We're so scared of our own self-preservation, and we're so scared of people not liking us and judging us that we are willing to sacrifice everything on that altar. And that is an altar that I have been raging against from the very moment I came out of the womb. And I love you. And I want you to get better because of this. God bless you, and thank you guys so much for watching. In the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, have a wonderful day.